Hey Terror Addicts, welcome to Night Terrors, delivering your favorite scary stories every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So if you're addicted to terror, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. And now, let the terror begin.
I used to live in a small town called Finn Tur. It was a quiet place to grow up, with one school, a doctor, a police station, a cinema with films shown a month after the national release date, 2 restaurants, and a host of local shops on the west side. Over on the east side of Finn Tur was the residential area, with about 40 houses, the town bar, and the local woods, which were about 20 square miles across. Even though I'd grown up my whole life playing in those woods, it was still easy to get lost in them, so my father used to tell me and my friends to never go past the creek that ran through about a mile in. Still, this gave us plenty of space to play, and we spent many summers building tree forts and playing hide and seek amongst the tall trees. One late summer evening, me and my friend Jess were out near the creek, seeing how close we could sneak up on the rabbits that inhabited the area. I'd spent about 10 minutes searching for one, and in my eagerness, I'd left Jess behind. She'd stopped to examine some odd-shaped rocks, and being impatient, I told her to catch up when she was done. I was just reaching the hill where the creek bent and curved around to travel off north for about 3 miles when I spied one chewing on some leaves near an oak tree. I held my breath, grabbed my jacket to stop it flapping in the breeze, and began slowly inching towards it. I was careful to avoid stepping on any twigs. If one snapped underfoot, it was a definite game over. And with the sun going down, this was probably be my last chance to play before I had to go home for dinner. The rabbit was blissfully unaware of my presence. Its brown coat tinged in orange by the setting sun, ears flopped down like a hunter's hat. The irony didn't escape me as I crept up on it. Silent as the leaves floating in the breeze, I smirked. I was about 4 meters away from it now, and it still hadn't noticed me. Not my best, but not bad. I slowed my pace even more. I didn't want to make a rookie mistake in my excitement and ruin this opportunity. The rabbit finished on its leaf and casually began sniffing the next one before digging in. 2 meters away now, the closest I'd ever gotten. I felt my heart beat in my chest, and for a second, I was scared the rabbit would hear it thudding against my ribcage and dart off. I shook my head and continued up behind it. It was almost within arm's reach. I couldn't believe it. I stretched out my arm, fingers extended. Wait till Jess heard about this. I'd be the first kid in town to have touched a forest rabbit. My hand was about a foot from brushing its soft pelt now. I could see each individual hair on its back. 30 centimeters. I'd done it. Suddenly an ear-splitting scream pierced the air, shaking the silence of the woods in shock and causing the resting birds to panic and scatter from the trees. I gasped, and quick as a flash the rabbit was under the bush and gone forever. I cursed aloud and spat, frustration clouding my head. It was a good few seconds before I even stopped to think where the scream had come from. Then, like a falling tree, it hit me. Jess. I sprinted back up to the creek as fast as I could. She'd been about 200 yards back when I'd last seen her, near the old silver birches. It took me about 2 minutes to reach the spot, next to the weird pile of rocks. My brow was covered in sweat and my hair was messed up from where the wind had whipped through it, but all I could think of was finding Jess. Even though I knew the woods were perfectly safe, I cursed myself for having left her alone. I spun around in a circle, scanning for any sign of her, but there was none. Jess! I yelled out, my voice traveling through the woods and echoing off the trees. It was getting darker, and tall shadows were being cast all around me like a net. Jess! Where are you? Call out to me! Jess! I stood and listened, but there was no reply. I was just about to run further up the creek where the trail began to see if she'd started to make her way back home when I saw it. On the other side of the creek, about 50 yards away, it stood, tall as the lowest branches of the sycamore next to it, about 7 foot up. It was covered in black rags, ripped and torn across its thin, wiry body, with a hood pulled tightly around its head, obscuring its features. 2 white, pupilless eyes stared at me from the shadowed recess, and I spied the flash of teeth, long slender arms with hook-like fingers splaying off of its stumped hands almost dragged against the floor by its sides. I suddenly noticed an overpowering smell and wondered how I'd missed it. I'd smelled it before on the farms when the cattle were harvested in the slaughterhouses. It was the smell of death, thick and despairing. I almost choked, but my mouth wouldn't make a sound. I just kept staring at it, petrified, blood running cold through my veins. Even the birds had stopped yelling in protest, and now there was nothing but silence. It and I, locked in a gaze that I would remember to this day. I don't know how long I was standing like that. It felt like minutes, but it was probably only a few seconds. Suddenly, it shifted its weight and hunched over. For a brief second, I thought it was going to start running at me, and I almost threw up, uncontrollable fear racking my body. But then I noticed it had stopped to collect something from the ground. I cried out silently. It was Jess. Her limp body looking like a doll compared to its freakishly proportioned frame. Despite being thin and stick-like, it picked her up with one bony hand with ease, fingers clasped around her waist, teeth bared in a crooked, humorless smile. It opened up a part of its shawl and pulled her close against its blackened torso. I caught a glimpse of the rib cage and rotten flesh. I reached out my arm as if somehow I could pull her back to me, but it was too late. It had turned and started off stride deeper into the forest. Even if I had known that area of the woods and had the strength to move my legs, I would have never been able to catch up to it. And before I even knew it, it had disappeared from sight, like it had never been there at all. Only the heavy smell of decay was left lingering in the air, the only evidence that I hadn't just imagined the whole thing. I snapped my head around and began to run back towards town. It was a good mile's distance, and I'd never run that far before. But that day, I ran, and I didn't stop. Jumping over fallen logs and ducking branches, I dared not look back. The darkness was almost complete by the time I burst from the undergrowth and out on the town's edge. I sprinted to the bar and threw myself through the door, practically collapsing on the floor. I don't really remember much after that, but from what I was told later on, it took them about 10 minutes to stop me from screaming about a demon I'd seen in the woods, and that we had to find Jess. By the time they'd actually gotten the story out of me and organized a search party, 2 hours had passed. Just dad shook me and shouted at me, asked me what happened to his baby girl. I could only stare at him dumbfounded and mute until my own father dragged him off me and told him to get a grip. The sheriff organized the townsfolk into 2 groups, and they each took a section of the woods. I tried to tell them that they all needed to bring their guns. That thing had to be killed. The thought of going up against such a nightmare unarmed was too much. I begged my father to stay, but he told me to calm down, that I was talking nonsense, and that I was probably just in shock. My mind making up stories to deal with what had happened. He sent me home to rest under a watchful eye of my mother as he led one of the search groups into the woods. 3 hours passed. I was laying in bed, still unable to sleep, huddled in my blankets, paranoid of every shadow and creak, convinced that the nightmare was going to come back for me, the only witness to its abomination. When I heard the front door open and the heavy steps of men entering the living room downstairs, I listened as they sat down and began to talk. Craziest thing I'd ever seen in my life, Jerry. I don't know what's out there, but it sure riled up the dogs. That was the sheriff speaking. What was it? A bear, do you think, Sheriff? I didn't know the speaker, but he sounded young. Maybe one of the farm hands? Maybe. All I know is 2 of my best tracker hands caught the scent, started going mad. They tore off into the woods faster than I'd ever seen them run. They hadn't come back. Now we're 2 dogs and a little girl down. Then the voice of my dad. I eased up a little. Knowing he's back in the house made me feel safer. Chris said he found the poor little girl's gloves down by the creek, right where my boys said they'd been playing. The unknown voice came again, obviously Clarisse. It's true. They were covered in some kind of slime or something. Don't know about it, but it smelled god-awful. One of the boys almost upped his liquor. Okay, well at least we know that she was there. I'm not hoping for much more, but I'll pray. It's one big forest, and the chances of finding her are mighty slim. The sheriff sighed. I suppose I better go tell the family that they should be prepared for the possibility they may never see Jess again. No man should have to outlive his kid, and the not knowing like this. Didn't Travis say he saw something big moving through the forest? Another unknown voice. This one knew. Yeah, he radioed in. Said he saw something. I don't know, some kind of giant moving in the distance. The man was half drunk and as dark as the bottom of the well out there. Probably just jumping at shadows. Most likely a bear or wolf or something. My father spoke, voice raised so everyone could hear. Okay, let's all go home. It's been a tough night. We'll search again for her tomorrow, even if it's only a body we find. It's better than the poor folks not knowing what happened. I want everyone to tell their kids not to go in that forest no more till we know for certain what occurred. You understood?" There were murmurs of agreement, and then solemn goodbyes. The men left, and the front door locked and shut behind them. My father moved about downstairs for a few minutes before climbing the stairs and going to bed. Before he turned in, he poked his head into my room to check if I was okay. I just pretended to be asleep. I had nothing to say. I didn't even know what to tell myself, but one thing I knew for certain: I hadn't been hallucinating. I'd really seen it, and whatever it was, it had Jess. I waited for a half hour until I heard my dad climb into his bed before I sat up and switched my bedside light on. I crept out of my bed and got dressed as quietly as I could, then descended the stairs. My father had taught me how to shoot and maintain a gun a few years ago. Out here in the country, it's important to know, hunting was a tradition amongst the men, and when I was old enough, my father would take me camping in the woods for a weekend of game shooting, like his father before him. I knew where my dad kept his .44 Magnum and the rounds in the garage, and after searching around for a few minutes, I found the key for the lockbox. I opened it up, loaded the pistol, and grabbed a flashlight before leaving the house and locking the door behind me.